The morning of the Cedar Hills annual Arts and Earth Festival dawned with the kind of perfect Oregon sunshine that feels like a promise. I woke before my alarm, my stomach a tangle of nerves and hope. For months I'd been preparing. Late nights melting beeswax and oils, weekends foraging for herbs, endless batches of small batch preserves cooling on my countertops. "Today's the day, Dad," I said, setting down a cup of tea beside my father's armchair. George Brooks looked up from his newspaper, his hands trembling slightly, a reminder of why I'd left Portland 5 years ago. The early Parkinson's wasn't taking him quickly, thank God, but it was taking him. "You nervous, Ellie?" he asked, using the nickname only he was allowed. "A little," I admitted, smoothing my apron. "But I think people will finally see what I've been working on." He folded the newspaper carefully, those teachers' hands still precise despite their tremor. They should have seen it long ago. I just smiled. At 44, I'd learned that should was the most useless word in the English language. 2 hours later, I stood behind my booth at Cedar Hills Park, watching the festival come alive around me. My display wasn't flashy. Hand-lettered signs, mason jars of golden preserves, soaps wrapped in simple brown paper tied with twine, herbal tinctures in amber bottles. But everything was made with knowledge, care, and ingredients I could trace to their source. 5 years of study hadn't been wasted. People began arriving in waves, young families in athleisure, older couples with woven market bags, teenagers with perfect Instagram-ready outfits. Cedar Hills prided itself on being progressive, sustainable, connected to the earth. These were my people, or so I'd thought. I noticed the commotion before I saw its cause. A crowd was gathering across the green, voices rising in excitement. Music started pumping, actual DJ mixed music at a local festival. I craned my neck to see. "Heather's here," said, Susan Lake, appearing beside my booth. Susan had been my neighbor for 4 years, but lately I'd seen less of her. She'd become part of Heather Langston's orbit, like so many others. "Quite an entrance," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Susan nodded, fidgeting with one of my lavender sachets without really seeing it. "She's launching her new line today, Cedar Glow. It's going to be huge." Her eyes were already drifting toward the commotion. "I should go say hi. I'll come back later to check out your stuff." She wouldn't. I already knew. Curiosity finally pulled me away from my booth. I asked the teenager from the coffee stand to watch my table and made my way toward the crowd. Heather Langston's booth wasn't a booth, it was an event. A sleek, modern structure with bamboo and recycled metal, professional signage with her perfect cursive logo, Instagram-worthy photo backdrops, and yes, a DJ spinning ambient electronica. Young women in matching Cedar Glow t-shirts circulated with trays of champagne in compostable glasses. And at the center of it all stood Heather herself, 40, flawless, with the kind of casual, perfect blonde waves that took at least an hour to achieve. She'd moved to Cedar Hills just 18 months ago, buying the modern eco-house at the end of my street, and had somehow become the neighborhood's center of gravity. "Elena," she called when she spotted me, waving as though we were dear friends. We weren't. "So glad you could make it. Everyone, this is Elena Brooks. She makes, what is it again? Soaps?" "Soaps, preserves, herbal remedies," I said, feeling immediately like I was apologizing. Right. Heather's smile never reached her eyes. "So quaint. You know, my grandmother used to make jam too." The circle around her tittered politely. "Elena used to work in corporate, didn't you?" Heather continued. "In Portland?" "Marketing executive," I said, straightening my shoulders slightly, "for Riverstone Agency. And then you came back to take care of your dad. So sweet." Her tone made it sound like I'd taken up scrapbooking, not restructured my entire life. "Everyone, try the Cedar Glow Illuminating Serum. It's our hero product. Locally sourced, organic ingredients, scientifically formulated." I wanted to ask what scientifically formulated meant, or where exactly these ingredients were sourced, but the crowd was already surging forward to sample from the gleaming bottles. "Elena, will you excuse us? We're about to do the big reveal. Plus, someone should probably watch your booth." As I walked away, I heard her stage whisper to someone, "Elena's stuff? It's irrelevant now. People want results, not jars that look like they came from Grandma's kitchen." Laughter followed me back to my deserted booth. By closing time, I'd sold 3 jars of blackberry preserves, 2 lavender sachets, and 1 small bottle of sleep tincture. $72 total. My booth fee had been $150. As I packed up, I could see Heather's team breaking down their display, laughing, clinking the last of the champagne. The Cedar Hills community Instagram account was already filled with photos of her launch. Cedar Glow was trending locally. I lifted the last box into my old Subaru and closed the hatch. Across the parking lot, Heather was climbing into her Tesla, surrounded by admirers. Our eyes met briefly. She smiled and waved, victorious. I drove home in silence, the weight of public rejection sitting on my chest like a stone. "How'd it go, Ellie?" Dad asked when I walked in. He was still in his armchair, but I could tell he'd tried to prepare dinner. A half-chopped onion sat on the cutting board, abandoned when his hands had likely betrayed him. I set down my boxes and went to finish the chopping. "It was fine," I lied. "Just fine." Later, after he'd gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the property tax bill that had arrived yesterday. The county had reassessed our home value, nearly doubling our tax burden. The modest savings I'd built from my online sales wouldn't cover it for long. I pulled my laptop closer and opened my resume file. Perhaps it was time to admit defeat, to return to Portland, to corporate life, to the world I'd left behind. But as I stared at the screen, something hardened inside me. I'd built something real here, something with value. The fact that my neighbors couldn't see it didn't make it any less true. I closed the laptop and instead pulled out my appeal forms for the tax assessment. I'd already started the process weeks ago, putting my corporate background to good use. I'd found a clerical error in the county's methodology that might just save our home. Tomorrow I'd keep making soap, keep growing herbs, keep believing in the work of my hands, even if no one else did. 5 years earlier, I'd been Elena Brooks, Senior Marketing Director at Riverstone Agency in Portland. I had a corner office, a team of 12, and the kind of salary that meant never checking your bank balance before dinner at Cabazon. My condo overlooked the Pearl District. My closet was full of theory suits. My weekends were packed with networking events and gallery openings. Then came the call. "Ms. Brooks, this is Providence Hospital. Your father's had a fall." Those 9 words collapsed the carefully constructed architecture of my life. Dad was okay, physically, at least. But the fall had led to tests, which led to the Parkinson's diagnosis. Early stages, the doctor had assured us. Manageable, but he shouldn't be alone. I'd taken a leave of absence, intending to stay just long enough to get him settled with in-home care. But sitting in the house where I'd grown up, watching the confusion in my father's eyes when we discussed care options, I realized the truth. He didn't just need any caregiver. He needed me. "I can't leave my job, Dad," I'd explained, both to him and to myself. "It's everything I've worked for." My father, George Brooks, who'd taught high school mathematics for 37 years, who'd raised me alone after Mom died when I was 12, just looked at me with those steady blue eyes. "Is it everything, Ellie? Really?" 3 weeks later, I'd resigned from Riverstone, rented out my condo, and moved back to Cedar Hills, into my childhood bedroom. My colleagues had been bewildered. My boss, outraged. "You're throwing away your career," she'd said during our final meeting. "For what? To play nurse?" I hadn't bothered explaining. She wouldn't have understood. Those first months had been harder than I'd anticipated. Not just the adjustment to my father's care, but the abrupt severance from my identity. Who was Elena Brooks without her career? Without her carefully curated social circle? Without the validation of professional success? The answer came slowly, unexpectedly. I'd always loved working with my hands, a trait inherited from my mother, who'd been an avid gardener and home cook. Now, with time stretching differently around me, I returned to those roots. I planted herbs, I experimented with soap making, I took online courses in herbalism and natural product formulation. I got certified in small batch food production. I converted the garden shed into a workspace. And somewhere along the way, I discovered something surprising. I was happy. Not the sharp, competitive happiness of closing a big account, but something deeper and more sustaining. I was creating again, not just marketing other people's creations. My online shop, Brooks Botanicals, didn't make me rich, but it did well. Enough to supplement Dad's pension. More importantly, it gave me purpose. Cedar Hills had changed during my Portland years. Once a modest suburb, it had gentrified into a haven for eco-conscious professionals and wealthy progressives drawn to Oregon's beauty but unwilling to sacrifice urban amenities. Our simple mid-century home, once standard for the neighborhood, was now dwarfed by renovated craftsmen's and modern eco-builds. I'd found my place in this new landscape quietly. I joined the community garden, I taught occasional workshops at the library. I supplied my soaps to a few local shops. I wasn't prominent, but I was present. Then Heather Langston arrived, purchasing the striking glass and reclaimed timber home at the end of our street, a house featured in Dwell magazine and rumored to have cost over $2 million. Within months, she'd joined the HOA board, started a neighborhood sustainability blog, launched a community wellness initiative, and somehow positioned herself as Cedar Hills' resident eco-lifestyle expert. Her Instagram account, Heather Langston Living, had over 50,000 followers. Her home office had been featured in a spread on mindful entrepreneurship. What exactly her business was remained somewhat mysterious. Something in wellness consulting and sustainable lifestyle branding. Whatever it was, it seemed to involve many photo shoots but little actual production. Our paths rarely crossed, but when they did, Heather always greeted me with the particular warmth of someone who doesn't remember your name but doesn't want you to know it. "You make those cute little soaps, don't you?" she'd asked once, at a neighborhood potluck. "So crafty." I'd nodded, not bothering to explain the difference between crafty and craft, between hobby and vocation. As Heather's influence in Cedar Hills grew, I noticed subtle shifts. Susan, my neighbor and casual friend, began dropping Heather's name into conversation. Heather Says became a frequent preface. The community newsletter featured more of Heather's initiatives. The local shops that had once carried my products began stocking glossier alternatives. None of it had seemed important until the festival, until I'd stood in the shadow of spectacle and heard my work dismissed as irrelevant. Now, a week after that humiliating day, I sat at my kitchen table sorting through emails. My online orders had slowed to a trickle. The Cedar Hills community page was filled with posts about Heather's amazing product launch and her newest initiative, a local tax advocacy group aimed at empowering homeowners. I scrolled through the comments, noting the eager responses from neighbors planning to attend her first meeting, including Susan. Just then, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Susan herself. "Elena, did you get the new tax assessment? Ours doubled. Heather's organizing an emergency meeting tonight. You should come." I set down my phone without answering and looked at the stack of paperwork beside me. The appeal I'd filed 3 weeks ago, the response from the county acknowledging the clerical error, the adjusted assessment notice that had arrived yesterday, reducing our tax burden back to its previous level. I'd already solved my problem, quietly, without fanfare or community meetings. Using skills honed over years in corporate America, knowledge no one in Cedar Hills seemed to remember I possessed. A small, petty part of me wanted to ignore Susan's text, to let Heather run her performative meeting while the tax deadline approached, to watch from a distance as they all realized, too late, that Instagram activism couldn't fix a bureaucratic problem. But that wasn't who I was. Not really. I picked up my phone and typed a response. "Thanks for letting me know. I've actually already addressed this for our property. Happy to share what I learned." The text from Susan went unanswered for so long I assumed she'd ignored me. I spent the evening helping Dad with his physical therapy exercises, then retreated to my workspace to fill the few online orders that had trickled in. The familiar rhythm of measuring oils, melting beeswax, and blending herbs calmed me. This, at least, was something I understood. My phone buzzed around 9 o'clock. Susan again. "What do you mean you addressed it? The county made a huge mistake. Heather says we need community action." I stared at the message, weighing my response carefully. Before I could reply, another text arrived. "Meeting at Heather's tomorrow, 7 p.m. You should really come." I set the phone down and continued wrapping a lavender soap bar in simple brown paper. No response seemed adequate. What would I say? That I'd already won a battle they didn't even know how to fight? That their community leader was leading them nowhere? The next day passed quietly. I shipped packages, restocked my meager inventory at the 2 shops that still carried my products, and helped Dad with his gardening. His hands could still manage some tasks if we took it slowly. We didn't discuss the tax situation or Heather's meeting. Dad had never been one for neighborhood drama. At 6:45 that evening, I was surprised to hear a knock at our door. Susan stood on my porch, looking slightly embarrassed. I thought maybe we could walk over together. She was dressed in what I'd come to think of as the Cedar Hills uniform, expensive athleisure that had never seen a gym, paired with carefully casual jewelry that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "I wasn't planning to attend," I said. Susan's eyebrows shot up. "But Elena, this affects everyone. The reassessment is outrageous. Some people might have to sell if we can't fight it." "I know," I said, keeping my voice even. That's why I filed an appeal 3 weeks ago. It was approved yesterday. Her mouth formed a small O of surprise. You… what? How? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to close the door to keep my small victory private. But another part, the part that had once led marketing teams and navigated corporate politics, recognized an opportunity. Why don't you come in? I can show you. Susan followed me into the kitchen, where I had my paperwork organized in a neat folder. For the next 15 minutes, I walked her through the process. The clerical error I'd identified in the assessment, methodology, the specific statutes I'd cited in my appeal, the documentation I'd provided. This is incredible, she said finally, looking up from the approval letter. But why didn't you tell anyone? The whole neighborhood is panicking. I tried to tell you yesterday, I said, keeping my tone neutral. No one seemed interested. Susan had the grace to look embarrassed. We should take this to Heather's meeting. People need to know. I shook my head. The appeal deadline is tomorrow at 5 p.m. Her meeting won't leave people enough time to file properly. Susan checked her watch. Then we need to go now. Bring everything. Please, Elena. 20 minutes later, we were walking up the dramatic stone pathway to Heather's eco-mansion. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see a crowd, already gathered in her open-concept living room, at least 30 neighbors sitting on her minimalist furniture and sustainably sourced floor cushions. Susan didn't bother ringing the bell, just pushed open the heavy wooden door. Sorry we're late, she announced, pulling me into the room behind her. But we need to start with Elena. She has something important to share. All eyes turned to me, including Heather's. She stood at the front of the room beside a sleek digital display showing a PowerPoint titled Citizen Tax Action Initiative. Elena, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. We didn't think you'd join us. We're just getting started with our action plan. Actually, Susan interrupted, Elena's already solved the problem, for her house at least, and she can help the rest of us do the same. A murmur ran through the room. Heather's perfect smile flickered momentarily. That's interesting, she said. But we're organizing a community response. Strength in numbers. The deadline is tomorrow, I said quietly but firmly. Individual appeals need to be filed by 5 p.m. The murmur grew louder. Someone at the back called out, "What appeals?" Heather raised her hands to quiet the room. Let's stay focused, everyone. Our strategy is to approach this as a unified community. I've been in touch with a real estate attorney who will charge you consultation fees for information that's freely available on the county website. I finished, surprising myself with my boldness. I'm sorry to interrupt, but time really is of the essence here. The room fell silent. Heather's smile had completely vanished now. Susan pushed me gently forward. Just show them what you showed me, Elena. For the next 20 minutes, I did exactly that. I explained the reassessment error, walked through the appeal process, and answered questions from increasingly concerned neighbors. With each answer, I could feel the room's energy shifting, attention moving from Heather to me, respect replacing the dismissal I'd grown accustomed to. I have all the templates and forms here, I concluded, holding up my folder. Anyone who wants copies is welcome to them, but you'll need to act quickly. The room erupted in motion and voices. Neighbors crowded around me, asking questions, taking photos of my documents with their phones, thanking me with a sincerity I hadn't experienced from many of them before. Through the crowd, I could see Heather standing alone by her PowerPoint, arms crossed, face tight with barely concealed anger. Our eyes met briefly before she turned away, tapping furiously on her phone. Later, as I helped the last few neighbors understand the appeal forms, Susan touched my arm. I had no idea you knew all this, she said quietly. No one ever asked. I replied without bitterness. It was simply a fact. As we walked home in the gathering darkness, Susan was uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, she spoke. I owe you an apology, Elena, for a lot of things. I shook my head. You don't. I do, she insisted. I got caught up in, I don't know, the shininess of it all. Heather makes everything seem so perfect, so curated, and somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing what was real. I thought about Heather's gleaming booth at the festival, about the champagne and the DJ and the perfectly styled display, about how easily people had been drawn to spectacle over substance. It's a common mistake, I said gently. We reached my house and I turned to say goodnight. Susan surprised me by pulling me into a quick hug. Thank you, she said. Not just for the tax help, for not giving up on the neighborhood even when we gave up on you. I watched her walk to her own house next door, then went inside. Dad was dozing in his chair, the television playing softly. "How was the meeting?" he asked, stirring as I entered. "Illuminating," I said, and found myself smiling. By noon the next day, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Emails, texts, even calls from neighbors I barely knew, all with questions about the tax appeal. I set up my laptop at the kitchen table and started responding methodically, sending template after template, answering question after question. Dad watched from his usual chair, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Looks like you're back in demand," he observed. "Just until the deadline," I replied, but I couldn't help feeling a small glow of satisfaction. This was the Elena Brooks I remembered, efficient, knowledgeable, needed. Around 2 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Martin Chen, the current HOA president, standing on my porch. "Elena," he said, extending his hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to thank you personally for your help with the tax situation." I invited him in, offering tea, which he politely declined. "The truth is," he continued, settling onto our worn sofa, "the HOA should have caught this weeks ago. We've been distracted." By Heather's initiatives, he didn't need to say. By the flash and dazzle of Cedar Hill's newest influencer. "It's easy to miss," I said diplomatically. "I only caught it because I used to review contracts for a living. Pattern recognition." Martin nodded thoughtfully. "That's actually why I'm here. The board was wondering if you'd consider joining our financial oversight committee. We could use someone with your background." The invitation surprised me. I'd lived in Cedar Hills for 5 years since returning from Portland, and this was the first time anyone had sought out my professional expertise. "I'd be happy to help," I said. "Though I should warn you, I'm not exactly in Heather's fan club at the moment." Martin's expression turned wry. "Between us, her star is fading a bit today. The tax initiative was supposed to be her big community leadership moment. Now everyone's filing individual appeals instead." I felt a twinge of sympathy for Heather, quickly suppressed by the memory of Elena's stuff. It's irrelevant now. By 4:30 that afternoon, I'd helped over 20 households file their appeals. My inbox was full of grateful messages. The community page, which yesterday had been dominated by Heather's tax initiative, now featured multiple posts thanking me by name. I was just shutting down my laptop when another knock came at the door. This one I'd been half expecting, half dreading. Heather Langston stood on my porch, immaculate as always in slim white jeans and a cashmere sweater the exact shade of a robin's egg. Her smile was firmly in place, but strain showed around her eyes. "Elena," she said brightly, "I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all," I replied, though we both knew it was a lie. "Would you like to come in?" She hesitated, glancing at her watch. "Actually, I'm in a bit of a rush. The appeal deadline is in 30 minutes. "Of course." She wasn't here to apologize or make peace. She was here because she needed something. "I've been so busy organizing the community response that I haven't had time to file my own appeal," she continued, her smile never wavering. "Susan mentioned you had templates." For a moment, I considered telling her I'd run out, or that it was too late to help. But that small, petty impulse passed quickly. "Come in," I said. "We'll get it done." For the next 20 minutes, I walked Heather through the same process I'd explained to everyone else. She took notes on her phone, asked surprisingly astute questions, and thanked me with a politeness that seemed almost genuine. As I printed her completed appeal forms, she wandered around my living room, taking in the bookshelves, the family photos, the simple, comfortable furnishings. "You know," she said, "your father was my math teacher. Years ago, before I moved to Seattle. This was news to me. You grew up in Cedar Hills?" She nodded, examining a photo of Dad from his teaching days. "My maiden name was Peterson. I sat in the back and was terrible at algebra." I tried to reconcile this information with the Heather I thought I knew. The perfect, polished influencer who'd appeared in our neighborhood fully formed. "He was a good teacher," she added, patient, even with hopeless cases like me. I handed her the printed forms. "You're not exactly a hopeless case now." She took the papers, her perfect nails brushing my fingers. "We all create versions of ourselves, don't we? Sometimes we just get caught up in them." Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, I glimpsed something unexpected in Heather Langston. Uncertainty, perhaps even regret. Then her phone chimed and the moment passed. She glanced at the screen and straightened her shoulders. "I should go. The deadline." At the door, she paused. "Elena? Thank you. And about the festival, what I said—" "It's fine," I interrupted, not wanting her apology. Not yet, anyway. "No, it wasn't. But I'd like to make it up to you." She hesitated, I'm hosting a small business mixer next month. Local vendors, some investors, press. Your products should be represented. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. An acknowledgement, at least. I'll think about it, I said. After she left, I stood in the doorway watching her walk down the street toward the county drop box, appeal forms in hand. Her posture was still perfect, her stride confident, but something had shifted. Was that Heather Langston? Dad asked when I came back inside. Former student of yours, apparently. Peterson? He smiled, the memory clearly surfacing. Heather Peterson, smart girl but desperate to be liked, always worried about what everyone thought of her. I looked out the window where Heather had disappeared around the corner. Some things don't change. And some do, Dad replied, nodding toward my laptop. You helped a lot of people today, Ellie, including her. That evening, I returned to my workspace and started a new batch of soap, a recipe I'd been experimenting with using cedar and bergamot. I measured and mixed. I thought about the day's events, about visibility and invisibility, about substance and spectacle. My phone buzzed with a notification. The Cedar Hills community page had a new post from Martin Chen. A huge thanks to Elena Brooks, whose expertise and generosity helped many neighbors successfully file tax appeals today. This is what true community leadership looks like. Your post already had dozens of likes and appreciative comments. One in particular caught my eye. Couldn't agree more. Elena's knowledge was invaluable today. Sometimes the quietest voices have the most to say. Heather Langston. I set down my phone and returned to my soap making, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new interactions with a neighborhood that suddenly saw me differently. But tonight I had work to do. Real work. With my hands. The Cedar Hills Farmers Market bustled with Saturday morning energy. Children chasing each other between stalls, couples strolling hand in hand, serious shoppers with canvas bags examining produce. 6 weeks had passed since the tax appeal deadline, and summer had fully arrived in Oregon, bringing with it a riot of local produce and renewed community spirit. I adjusted the display of soap bars at my booth, a real booth this time, not just a folding table. Martin Chen had personally invited me to become a regular vendor after the tax situation, waiving the first month's fee as a community service thank you. The gesture had touched me more than I'd expected. Good morning, Elena, called Margot Williams, stopping by with her signature enormous coffee. Margot ran the community garden and had barely spoken 10 words to me in 5 years. Now she visited my booth weekly. Those new bath bombs look amazing. Are they the ones with CBD? Just lavender and eucalyptus, I replied. The CBD ones are still in development. She selected 2, chatting about her garden plans while I wrapped them. This too was new. People lingering, engaging, seeing me. The morning passed steadily, with a comfortable flow of customers and conversations. Around 11, I spotted Susan approaching with a woman I didn't recognize. Tall, elegantly dressed in the understated way that suggested serious money. Elena, Susan said, sounding slightly breathless. This is Victoria Harding. She owns Cascadia Naturals. I recognized the name immediately. Cascadia Naturals was a regional chain of high-end organic markets, the kind of store I'd always dreamed of getting my products into. Victoria's interested in local vendors for their new Cedar Hills location, Susan continued. I told her she had to meet you. Victoria extended her hand. Susan speaks very highly of your work. I'd love to. See your product line. For the next 15 minutes, I walked Victoria through my offerings, explaining ingredients, processes, and philosophy. She asked sharp, knowledgeable questions and examined everything with a careful eye. Your formulations are impressive, she said finally. And I love that everything is truly local, not just marketed that way. She handed me a business card. Email me your wholesale catalog. I think there could be a good fit for the Cedar Hills store, possibly others if it goes well. After she left, Susan beamed at me. Victoria rarely makes market visits herself. I mentioned you at yoga, and she seemed genuinely interested. Thank you, I said, meaning it deeply. Susan had become my unexpected champion these past weeks, recommending my products to friends, bringing visitors to my booth, rebuilding our friendship with a sincerity I hadn't anticipated. Don't thank me, she replied. Your work speaks for itself. I just wasn't listening before. The market crowd thinned as lunchtime approached. I was considering packing up early when I saw her, Heather Langston, making her way deliberately toward my booth. We hadn't spoken since the evening of the tax deadline. I'd declined her small business mixer invitation, sending a polite but firm email explaining I had prior commitments. The truth was more complicated. I wasn't ready to be a token presence at her event, wasn't convinced her sudden interest in my work was genuine. "Your booth looks wonderful," she said, stopping before my display. She wore large sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat as though trying to maintain a low profile. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone professional. "Can I help you find something specific?" Heather glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you privately. Do you have a moment?" Curiosity won out over caution. I asked the flower vendor next door to watch my booth and followed Heather to a quiet spot beneath a maple tree at the edge of the market. "I'm launching a new business," she said without preamble. "A real one this time. Not just Instagram theater." I waited, unsure where this was heading. "It's a marketplace concept," she continued. "Curated local products, ethically sourced, with transparent supply chains and fair compensation for artisans." She took a breath. "I'd like your products to be featured. Not just included, featured." I studied her face, looking for the calculation behind the offer. "Why?" Heather removed her sunglasses, meeting my gaze directly. "Because they're excellent. Because you know what you're doing. Because—" she hesitated. "Because I've been doing this all wrong." The admission seemed to cost her something. She glanced away, then back to me. "The tax situation was humbling. Watching you quietly solve a problem I was just performing around. It made me realize how empty most of what I've been doing really is." I wasn't sure I believed her transformation, but her discomfort seemed genuine. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "A partnership," she said. "Your expertise and products, my platform and connections, equal billing, equal profit share." The offer was unexpectedly generous. Too generous? I wondered what I was missing. "I have investors lined up," Heather added. "Real ones, not just Instagram followers. But they're waiting on one thing: authentic product expertise. That's what you have that I don't." Ah, there it was. She needed me to legitimize her business to investors. "I'm not interested in being a prop, Heather." "Not a prop," she said quickly. "A partner. Real input on everything from product selection to pricing models. I'm good at the things you hate. Marketing, social media, investor relations. You're good at the things I can't fake. Formulation, sourcing, quality control." It was a compelling pitch, I had to admit. And yet, the last time I trusted the spotlight at one of your events, I ended up humiliated, I reminded her. Heather winced. "I know. I was insecure and petty, and I treated you terribly. I can't undo that, but I can try to make it right." Her sincerity caught me off guard. This wasn't the polished, performative Heather I'd come to expect. "I need to think about it," I said finally. She nodded, handing me a sleek folder. "All the details are in here. Take your time." As she turned to leave, she paused. "Elena? For what it's worth, I really am sorry about the festival. You didn't deserve that." I watched her walk away, the folder heavy in my hands. That evening, I spread the contents across my kitchen table while Dad worked on a crossword puzzle nearby. The business plan was impressive, detailed, realistic, with none of the empty buzzwords I'd expected. The financial projections were solid. The partnership agreement was fair, even generous. "What do you think?" I asked Dad, who had been quietly observing. He set down his pencil. "I think you're at a crossroads, Ellie. That's cryptic, even for you." He smiled. "You came back to Cedar Hills for me, gave up a career you loved, found a new path. Now you're being offered a chance to combine both worlds, your corporate experience and your craft." By someone who called my work irrelevant just weeks ago, I pointed out. "People change," he said simply. "Sometimes it takes being humbled to see clearly." I thought about Heather's face at the market, the vulnerability, the awkward sincerity, so different from her usual perfect poise. "What if it's just another performance?" I asked. Dad shrugged. "Then you'll know soon. Enough, and you'll walk away." "But what if it's not?" I gathered the papers back into the folder. He was right. This was a crossroads, a chance to step back into a bigger arena without abandoning the work I'd come to love. But was I ready to trust Heather Langston? To risk being invisible again? "Sleep on it," Dad suggested. "Things often look clearer in the morning." But morning brought no clarity. Only a text from Susan. "Have you heard about Heather's new venture? Word is she's looking for a partner with real product expertise. You'd be perfect." Then another message from Martin Chen. "Victoria Harding mentioned meeting you. Very impressed. Also heard rumors you might be partnering with Heather Langston on something bigger. Neighborhood is buzzing. News traveled fast in Cedar Hills. Too fast. I hadn't given Heather an answer yet, but somehow the narrative was already being written. Was this deliberate pressure? Another of Heather's manipulations? I was still pondering this when my phone rang. An unknown number. Is this Elena Brooks? A woman's crisp voice came through the speaker. Yes, speaking. This is Diane Marshall from Westlake Investments. I understand you're involved with Heather Langston's new marketplace concept? My suspicion deepened. Who gave you my number, Ms. Marshall? Victoria Harding, actually. She spoke very highly of your products and expertise. We're considering funding Heather's venture, but we'd like to speak with the product development partner directly. Your involvement would be a significant factor in our decision. I felt a familiar pressure building, the sensation of being maneuvered into a corner. It was a feeling I knew well from my corporate days, and one I'd been glad to leave behind. I haven't made any decisions about partnerships with Heather, I said carefully. There was a pause on the line. I see. That's not the impression we were given. Of course it wasn't. Because Heather was still Heather, using my credibility to bolster her pitch without waiting for my actual commitment. Thank you for your call, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'll let you know if my status changes. After hanging up, I sat motionless at the kitchen table, anger building slowly. 5 years of invisibility, 1 moment of public humiliation, and now suddenly my name had value, but only as a prop in someone else's story. I picked up the partnership folder and my car keys. It was time for a direct conversation. Heather's eco-mansion was even more impressive up close. All clean lines and natural materials, with massive windows that seemed to invite the surrounding forest inside. I parked my Subaru behind her Tesla and walked up the stone path, the partnership folder tucked under my arm like a shield. I rang the doorbell, hearing its mellow chime echo through the house. Footsteps approached and the heavy door swung open. Heather looked genuinely surprised to see me. Elena, I wasn't expecting— We need to talk, I interrupted, my voice calmer than I felt. Now. She stepped back, gesturing me inside. Of course. Come in. The interior was a minimalist dream. Concrete floors softened by sustainable wool. Rugs, reclaimed wood furniture, carefully curated art pieces. A wall of windows overlooked a Japanese-inspired garden. In another mood, I might have admired it all. Today, it just felt like another performance. Coffee? She offered. No, I just got a call from Diane Marshall at Westlake Investments. She seems to think I'm already your partner. Heather's expression shifted. Surprise, then a flicker of guilt, quickly masked. I may have implied our discussions were further along than they are. Investors respond better to certainty. So you lied. I accelerated the timeline. She met my gaze directly. I was confident you'd say yes. Based on what? Our long history of mutual trust? The sarcasm in my voice was sharp enough to cut. Heather sighed, gesturing toward her living room. Can we sit, please? I followed her reluctantly, taking a seat on a deceptively comfortable armchair while she perched on the edge of the sofa across from me. I didn't handle this well, she admitted. I was eager to move forward, and I thought— You thought you could manipulate me into saying yes by creating pressure from outside, I finished for her. It's a classic sales tactic. I used it myself back in my marketing days. She didn't deny it. The opportunity is real, Elena. The investors are serious. Your involvement would make the difference. Why me? There are dozens of artisan producers in the area with more established businesses than mine. Because you're the real thing, she said simply. You know what you're doing. Your products aren't just Instagram pretty. They're, expertly made. And after the tax situation, people trust you. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of invisibility, my moment of community recognition had made me valuable to someone who had actively contributed to that invisibility. I brought back your proposal, I said, placing the folder on her glass coffee table. I'm not interested in a partnership where manipulation is the opening. Move! Heather's perfect composure faltered. Elena, please, this is important to me. Why? You already have everything. The house, the followers, the community influence. Why does this particular business matter so much? She looked away toward the wall of windows. For a long moment, she was silent, and I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its polished edge. Do you know what it's like to build your entire identity around being seen, and then realize no one is really looking at you, just at the image you've created? The question caught me off guard, It was so unlike the Heather I thought I knew that I found myself listening despite my anger. Cedar Glow was a sham, she continued, still gazing out the windows. Private labeled products from a distributor in China. The locally sourced ingredients. Marketing copy. The scientific formulation. Standard chemicals with fancy names. She turned back to me, her expression stripped of its usual confidence. I know exactly how empty it all is. I've built a life out of empty. Why are you telling me this? Because when you helped everyone with their tax appeals, actually helped them, not just performed helping them, I saw what I've been missing. You made a real difference. People respect you for something substantial. Her admission hung between us, unexpectedly raw. I want to build something real this time, she continued. Something with actual value. But I can't do it alone, because I don't know how. I know how to look like I know what I'm doing. You actually know what you're doing. I studied her face, searching for the calculation behind the vulnerability. But all I saw was exhaustion, the kind that comes from maintaining a facade too long. If that's true, I said carefully, then why start with manipulation? Why not just be honest? Because that's the only language I'm fluent in, she admitted. I'm trying to learn a new one. The answer was disarming in its candor. I felt my anger softening, not disappearing but transforming into something more complex. I can't be your shortcut to authenticity, Heather. Not a shortcut, she said. A guide, maybe. A partner. I shook my head. Not like this. Not with investors already being told I'm on board. Not with the neighborhood buzzing about a partnership I haven't agreed to. Heather looked down at her. Hands. For the first time since I'd known her, her perfect manicure was slightly chipped. A tiny, humanizing flaw. What if we start over? She asked quietly. No investors, no announcements. Just you and me, seeing if we can build something together that makes sense for both of us. I considered her offer. The business concept was solid. The opportunity was real. And beneath the manipulation, I sensed a genuine desire for change. But trust had to be earned. I need time, I said finally. And I need honesty. Complete honesty from the beginning. She nodded. That seems fair. Call Diane Marshall. Tell her the truth, that we're in early discussions. Nothing more. Call Victoria too. Clear up any misconceptions you've created. I will, she promised. Today. I stood to leave, but paused at the edge of her perfect living room. Why did you say my work was irrelevant? At the festival, Heather's eyes met mine, and for once, there was no performance in them. Because I was terrified someone would realize yours was real and mine wasn't. The admission hung between us, simple and profound. Not an excuse, but an explanation that rang true. I nodded once, acknowledging her. Honesty without accepting it as an apology. Call me after you've spoken to the investors. We can talk again then. Driving home, I replayed our conversation in my mind. Heather Langston, the neighborhood's golden girl, the Instagram influencer with the perfect life, was admitting her kingdom was built on sand, and reaching out to me, of all people, to help her build something solid. Part of me was still wary, still expecting manipulation. But another part, the part that had always believed in second chances, wondered if people could truly change when properly humbled. Dad was waiting in the kitchen when I got home, a question in his eyes. She lied to investors about my involvement, I said, filling the kettle for tea. But then she told me the truth about why. And? I sighed, leaning against the counter. And I'm not sure what to think anymore. She seems genuinely interested in building something real. With me. Dad nodded slowly. People are rarely all one thing, Ellie. Even the ones who seem to be. She hurt me, I reminded him, and myself, publicly. Yes, she did. He picked up his crossword again. The question is whether that's the end of the story or just part of it. I poured hot water over a chamomile tea bag, watching it steep. The truth was, Heather's business proposal excited me. It offered a chance to scale what I loved doing without sacrificing quality or values. A chance to be seen for my expertise, not just tolerated for my quirkiness. But partnership required trust, and trust required time. My phone buzzed with a text from Heather. Called Diane and Victoria. Told them both the truth, that I jumped the gun and we're in very preliminary discussions. They're still interested whenever you're ready. No pressure. It was a small step, but in the right direction. Perhaps there was a story here still unfolding, one neither of us could fully see yet. 3 months later, I stood in a converted warehouse space in downtown Cedar. Hills, surrounded by the hum of activity. Contractors measured and marked, Designers sketched concepts on tablets, and in the center of it all, Heather directed the chaos with unexpected competence. "The apothecary section needs more natural light," she was saying to the contractor. "Elena's products should be displayed where customers can see the colors through the glass." She caught my eye across the room and waved me over. "What do you think about these shelving options?" she asked, showing me samples of reclaimed wood. "I'm leaning toward the cedar, but the walnut has a warmth that might complement your packaging better." This was the new Heather. Still detail-oriented, still perfectionistic, but focused now on substance as much as appearance. Our partnership had evolved cautiously over the summer, beginning with small test projects and gradually building toward this. Cedar and Brooks, a marketplace featuring curated local products with transparent sourcing and ethical practices. The name had been Heather's suggestion. "Your name should be first?" I'd protested during our planning session. "Alphabetical order," she'd replied with a smile. "Plus, cedar grows tall and visible. Brooks run deep and essential. It fits us." Now, examining the shelving samples, I pointed to the cedar. "This one. It's local and tells a better story." Heather nodded. Cedar it is. We'd fallen into an unexpected rhythm, each bringing different strengths to the venture. Heather handled investors, marketing, and design with a polished expertise I had to admire. I focused on product, curation, quality standards, and artisan relationships, the substance behind the style. To my surprise, we complemented each other well. Trust had come slowly, built on small proofs of change. Heather had made those investor calls as promised. She'd given me complete visibility into the business planning. She'd listened to my input on everything from layout to pricing models. Most surprisingly, she'd stepped back when needed, deferring to my expertise without trying to overshadow it. "Elena!" called a voice from the entrance. Susan appeared carrying 2 coffee cups. "Thought you could use this. The place looks amazing." She handed me a latte and surveyed the space with genuine excitement. Our friendship had deepened over recent months, evolving beyond the surface-level connection I had before. Susan had become one of my most vocal supporters, and surprisingly, one of the strongest advocates for my partnership with Heather. "Did you tell her about the workshop series?" Susan asked. Heather looked up from her conversation with the contractor. "Not yet. Wanted to confirm the space first." "What workshop series?" I asked. Susan beamed. "Heather's idea. Monthly workshops where you teach people your methods. Soap making, herbal remedies, preservation techniques. We already have a waiting list from the neighborhood group." I turned to Heather, surprised. "You want me to teach workshops? Here?" "If you're comfortable with it," she replied. "Your knowledge should be shared, not just your products sold. It adds another dimension to what we're creating." The suggestion touched me. My workshops at the library had always been small, sparsely attended affairs. The idea that people would now be waiting to learn from me was still new, still slightly disorienting. "I'd like that," I said simply. As Susan wandered off to examine the space, Heather lowered her voice. "There's something else I wanted to discuss. About your father." A flutter of concern rose in my chest. "What about him?" "I noticed at our last meeting that his tremor seems worse. Is he getting the care he needs?" The question wasn't intrusive, just genuinely concerned. Another change in Heather, this awareness of others beyond how they might serve her interests. "His neurologist recommended a new treatment program," I admitted. "But our insurance only covers part of it. I've been putting it off. Until—" I gestured around the warehouse. "Until this starts generating income." Heather nodded thoughtfully. "What if we allocated part of the initial investment to an employee health fund? You're technically our first employee as head of product development. The fund would cover supplemental healthcare needs beyond basic insurance." I stared at her, processing the suggestion. "Can we do that?" "I already discussed it with our accountant. It's unconventional but workable. We'd offer it to all employees eventually, but your father could benefit immediately." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught me off guard. This wasn't Instagram-ready charity or performative generosity. It was a practical solution offered without fanfare, the kind of substantial help I would never have expected from the Heather I met at the festival. "Thank you," I said simply. "That would make a significant difference for him." She nodded, already turning back to the contractor with a question about lighting. But in that brief exchange, something shifted in our relationship, moving beyond cautious collaboration toward genuine trust. Later that afternoon, I returned home to find Dad working in the garden, stubborn as always despite his increasingly unreliable hands. He looked up as I approached, reading my expression with the ease of long familiarity. "Good day?" he asked. I nodded. sitting beside him on the garden bench. The space is coming together. We open in 6 weeks. And Heather? Still playing well with others? I smiled at his phrasing. Better than expected. She suggested something today. A health fund that could help with your new treatment program. Dad raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound like the neighborhood Instagram queen. I think she's changing, I said. Or maybe showing parts of herself that were always there, just buried under all the performance. People can surprise you, he agreed, if you give them room to. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the late afternoon light filter through the maple trees. Dad had been right that night months ago. This had been a crossroads, a chance to combine my past and present into something new. I'd been cautious, wary of trusting too quickly, but also open to the possibility of genuine change. I'm proud of you, Ellie, Dad said suddenly, not just for the business, for seeing beyond the surface, for giving someone a second chance without making it too easy. His words warmed me. From anyone else, they might have sounded trite, but from George Brooks, a man who had spent 37 years seeing the potential in students others dismissed, they carried weight. I learned from the best, I replied. That evening, I worked in my shed, packaging the last online orders I would fulfill directly. Soon, my products would be available at Cedar and Brooks, alongside other carefully selected local artisans. My small business was evolving into something larger, something with greater reach but the same integrity. As I wrapped a jar of blackberry preserves in simple brown paper, I thought about the festival where this story had begun, standing invisible behind my booth while Heather shone in the eye spotlight. How strange that humiliation had led to this unexpected partnership, this new neither of us could have anticipated. My phone buzzed with a text from Heather. Press release approved, launching tomorrow. Sure you don't want your photo included? I smiled, typing back, positive. My products speak for themselves. Her reply came quickly. They do, but so should you when you're ready. I set down the phone, considering her words. Perhaps it was time to step further out of the shadows, to claim my expertise more publicly. Not for validation or approval, but because what I knew had value, real value that could help others. But that was a decision for another day. Tonight, I had soap to wrap, tinctures to bottle, and a future to prepare for. One where being seen felt less like vulnerability and more like strength. Speech! Speech! The call came from somewhere in the crowd, followed by supportive cheers and the clinking of glasses. I glanced at Heather, who stood beside me at the entrance to Cedar and Brooks, champagne flute in hand. She gave an encouraging nod. Your moment, she whispered. You earned it. The grand opening had exceeded all our expectations. The converted warehouse space gleamed with natural light, reclaimed wood, and carefully curated displays. Local journalists mingled with neighborhood residents and curious shoppers from surrounding communities. Victoria Harding from Cascadia Naturals was deep in conversation with our accountant, and Diane Marshall from Westlake Investments was introducing herself to other potential investors. Surprisingly, the crowd was genuinely diverse, not just Cedar Hills' usual affluent, eco-conscious residents, but people from all parts of town, drawn by our commitment to accessibility and transparent pricing. I stepped forward, suddenly aware of all eyes on me. 6 months ago, this would have been my nightmare. Now I felt a calm certainty as I looked out at the faces watching me. Many, familiar, some new, all attentive. Thank you all for coming today, I began, my voice steady. Cedar and Brooks represent something I've believed in for a long time. That quality and integrity don't have to be exclusive or inaccessible. That knowing where things come from and how they're made matters. That substance and beauty can coexist. I gestured to the space around us. Everything you see here has a story. Who made it? Where the materials came from? The knowledge and care that went into its creation. We believe those stories add value beyond packaging or branding. My eyes found Dad in the crowd, sitting in the new wheelchair we'd been able to purchase thanks to the Employee Health Fund. He gave me a small nod of encouragement. None of this would be possible without our amazing artisan partners, I continued, acknowledging the other local producers whose work filled our shelves. Or without my business partner, Heather Langston, who had the vision to create a space where expertise and ethics could take center stage. I turned to Heather, seeing genuine emotion in her eyes. Pride, yes, but also a humility that had been hard-won over these months of collaboration. We've created something here that honors both visibility and depth, I concluded. Style and substance. The cedar that grows tall and the brook that runs deep. Thank you for believing in our vision. Applause filled the space as I stepped back, relieved and strangely energized. Heather squeezed my arm briefly before moving forward to add her own remarks, polished and charismatic as always, but with an authenticity that no longer felt performative. As guests explored the store, I found myself in conversation after conversation, not about weather or neighborhood gossip, but about ingredient sourcing, traditional preservation methods, sustainable harvesting practices. People weren't just seeing me, they were seeing my knowledge, my passion, my expertise. Quite a change from the festival, said a voice beside me. Susan had appeared with 2 fresh glasses of champagne, offering one to me. Night and day, I agreed, accepting the glass. I still feel terrible about that, she admitted. About how we all treated you. I shook my head. Ancient history. Not that ancient. But look at you now. Elena Brooks, successful businesswoman and local celebrity. I laughed at the description. Hardly a celebrity. The woman with the waiting list for workshops? The artisan whose soap collection sold out in the first hour today? That woman. Susan raised her glass in a small toast. You were never irrelevant, Elena. Some of us just took too long to notice. As the evening continued, I made my way to where Dad sat, watching the festivities with quiet satisfaction. What do you think? I asked, perching on the arm of his wheelchair. I think your mother would be bursting with pride, he replied. I know I am. The mention of my mother brought a familiar pang, wishing she could have seen this moment, this evolution of the handcraft skills she'd first taught me. Yet somehow I felt her presence in the careful work of my hands, in the knowledge passed from her to me. Ms. Brooks? A young woman approached tentatively. I just wanted to say how excited I am about your winter workshop series. I signed up for all of them. I recognized her from the neighborhood, one of the younger residents who had recently moved in. Always polite but previously distant. I've been following your journey, she continued. How you stood your ground and built something authentic. It's inspiring for those of us just finding our way. Her words touched me unexpectedly. The idea that my path might serve as inspiration hadn't occurred to me. I'd been so focused on proving my own value that I hadn't considered how that proof might resonate with others. Thank you, I said sincerely. The workshops will be wonderful. I'm looking forward to sharing what I've learned. As the woman moved away, Dad caught my eye with a knowing smile. See, the quiet glow attracts its own attention eventually. Across the room, I spotted Heather deep in conversation with Martin Chen. She caught my glance and gestured me over. Elena? Martin was just suggesting we host the next community council meeting here, she explained. It would be good exposure, and they're discussing a new initiative for supporting local businesses. Specifically businesses with ethical practices like yours, Martin added. You two have created something that could become a model for the wider community. The irony wasn't lost on me, that Heather and I, once positioned as opposites in the neighborhood hierarchy, had now created something that transcended both our initial limitations. Her flair for presentation without my substance had been empty. My substance without her platform had been invisible. Together, we'd found a balance neither could have achieved alone. As the evening wound down, guests gradually departed with shopping bags and promises to return. Victoria confirmed that 3 of our artisans' products would be featured in Cascadia Natural stores beginning next month. Diane hinted at expansion. Possibilities for the future. The local newspaper photographer captured final images for next week's feature. Finally, only Heather and I remained in the quiet space, surveying what we'd built together. We did it, she said simply. We did, I agreed. Though I'll admit, I had my doubts along the way. Heather smiled ruefully. I gave you plenty of reasons for those doubts, and then plenty of reasons to overcome them. We walked through the space, adjusting displays and noting items to restock tomorrow. The silence between us was comfortable now, the ease of partners who had moved beyond performance into genuine collaboration. You know, Heather said as we reached the apothecary section featuring my products, I meant what I said months ago. Your work was never irrelevant. I was just terrified of its authenticity. And now I'm grateful for it. She straightened a row of amber bottles with careful hands. Authenticity is contagious, it turns out. Terrifying, but ultimately freeing. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The journey from invisibility to visibility had changed me too. Not by making me louder or more performative, but by helping me recognize the value in my quiet depth. Do you remember what you said that night at my house? Heather asked. That you couldn't be my shortcut to authenticity? I remember. You weren't a shortcut. You were a mirror. She met my gaze directly. Thank you for that, even when it was uncomfortable. We finished our closing routine and stepped out into the cool evening air, locking the door behind us. The cedar. And Brooke's sign glowed softly above the entrance, a simple, elegant design that balanced both our aesthetics. Big day tomorrow, Heather said as we walked toward our cars. First regular business day. Are you ready? I looked back at the space we'd created, then up at the clear Oregon sky filled with stars. More than ready. As I drove home, I thought about the long, winding path that had led to this moment. Leaving Portland to care for Dad, rediscovering my passion for creating with my hands, the years of quiet work, largely unseen, the humiliation at the festival, the unexpected opportunity that arose from being publicly underestimated. Each step had been necessary, even the painful ones. Each had taught me something essential about value. Real value, not the kind measured in Instagram, followers, or fleeting attention. Dad was asleep when I arrived home, his wheelchair parked neatly beside his bed. I quietly checked that his medication was prepared for morning, then stepped out to my workspace in the garden shed. This small space had been my sanctuary for 5 years, the place where I'd rediscovered my purpose when my corporate identity was stripped away. I wouldn't be giving it up. Cedar and Brooks would be my public face, but this shed would remain my creative heart, the place where experimentation and learning continued away from watchful eyes. On my workbench sat a new formulation I'd been developing, a healing balm made with locally harvested herbs and beeswax from my own small hives. It wasn't flashy or Instagram perfect. It wouldn't attract influencers or trend on social media. But it was real, effective, and made with knowledge and care. In a world chasing glitter, it offered a quiet glow of real value. And as I'd learned over these transformative months, substance always outshines spectacle, if you have the patience to wait for the right light. I closed up the shed and looked up at the stars once more, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new growth. But tonight, I could rest in the knowledge that being seen, truly seen, was worth the wait. And that sometimes the most powerful way to be seen is not to shine more brightly, but to deepen your own quiet truth until others cannot help but notice its glow.